Good afternoon, students, to whichever part of the country or globe that you belong to. So, welcome to this exciting journey of our learning curve that we are having as far as the topic of business environment is concerned. So, uh, I'm Professor Dinesh Gusai, would be taking you through our lecture series on business environment. I hope you might have gone to the earlier first session that we had on business environment, and I also hope that if you had any queries, drop a mail to ISBM. And just to take this ahead forward, a quick recap of whatever we have done last time. So what we had done last time was we have defined what is business and how the environment is going to affect business. As we were discussing it, we also discussed there were two factors that influence business. These are internal factors and the external factors. Internal factors are that something that the company can have control over. That means its vision, its mission, its values, its strategies, so on and so forth. And we also then spoke about the second aspect, that is the external factors. In external factors, and that's where we dig deep as far as business environment is concerned. We again divided those external factor into two parts. One, the micro external factors, and the other is the macro external factors. So we defined micro external factors from the perspective that anything that the company is in direct contact with or connect with are the micro external factors, and anything that it has a distant correlation are the macroeconomic factors or the macro environment factors that affect us as a business. So two aspects. So micro, when we spoke about the micro factors, micro external factors, those were things like which are in direct connect. So it could be about customers, it could be about customer centricity, it could be about the socio-cultural environment of the organization, it could be about the stakeholders. And then we also spoke about the macro factors, the macro external factors, including the socio-cultural norms. It could be about the government regulations. It could be about the overall economy of the marketplace. So these are the micro and macro factors. So now throughout the series, right from the day 2 session that we are having now and henceforth, we will be picking up one or two factors that are going to impact business. Now, as future CEOs of the organization, we need to understand how are they going to impact business. So we will look into these aspects one by one and get through it. So for today, as far as this session is concerned, would be addressing two factors which impact business. One, the socio-cultural factors, and the second are the environmental factors. So socio-cultural factors and environment factors are the two factors that we are going to deal with as far as this session is concerned. So around almost an hour and 15 minutes or so would be addressing on socio-cultural factors, and the rest around 40 minutes or so we would be speaking on environmental factors. Great. So let's take off. So first, the socio-cultural factors. Now, what are socio-cultural factors? Now, students, we need to understand that we have been always speaking about this, that we are living in a dynamic environment. We all know that. That's one. Number two, in this dynamic environment, there are so many elements that impact business, and we understand that these elements are varied. That's number one. Number two, they are not separate and distinct as we are studying it separately. In fact, they overlap each other, they kind of fuse in with each other, they are interdependent, they are interrelated as well. So, when we speak about the first factor, the socio-cultural factor that we'll discuss about, this also is dependent, correlated, proportional, inversely proportional to factors of business. So let's understand socio-cultural factors. So as the name suggests, socio-cultural comes from two words. One, sociology, the socio aspect. Culture means the overall culture, and we will understand what culture means. So combination of two elements, one sociology and the two the culture. Okay, so let's understand and delve into it. The social and cultural environment refers to the influence exercised by certain social factors which are beyond the company gate. A very important point. I would like to repeat this point. They are beyond the company gate. Means what? That had it been within the company gate, would it be an external factor? No, isn't it? We know that would be an internal factor. So when we speak about socio-cultural factors, it is beyond the company gate. That means there are factors dependent on nationality, the region, topography, the demographic conditions, so on and so forth. Also in the era and the generation that people are living in as well. So when we speak of socio-cultural factors, they are beyond the company gate. So let's understand culture. Now culture as a word, students, we have been hearing and listening this from a childhood days, isn't it? But we need to understand what all elements make up for a word called as culture, because there are various elements that kind of combine together, fuse together to form culture. And basically when we hear the word culture, we only generally tend to recollect of maybe tradition, festivals, yes or no? But from an organizational perspective, it's much more beyond that as well. So let's understand what does culture mean. So when we speak of culture, it includes ideas. Now, let me tell you friends, ideas differ from region to region. Now, ideas here means thoughts which are prevalent, thoughts which prevail, thought that exists at that particular point of time. And certain thoughts tend to remain at a particular place for longer period. For example, let's take an idea that the growth of a particular industry is going to be this percentage. Say for example, health industry. They say that health industry is one industry that will never have an exponential growth, neither it will die down or it cannot degrow. They say health industry kind of has a growth proportion of say around 6 to 9% annually. That's the growth that it takes on every year. But need to understand that this concept or idea about health industry exists predominantly in India. If you see across worldwide, this idea doesn't prevail. Sometimes health industry also goes for a big exponential growth based on, say for example, when Viagra was launched by Pfizer. So the growth of the industry actually took up to a different dimension altogether. So it depends on those factors also. One, what kind of ideas are prevalent as far as the culture is concerned? Two, arts. Now when I say arts, it includes painting, it includes music, it includes all aesthetic appeal, it includes sculpturing, it includes tradition. So lots of them. Now the question to be asked over here is, how is that going to impact business? Think about it. Now, a particular art form, any may be it, it also impacts the way people think and align themselves for. And that's so very important to understand, because certain businesses are correlated in that direction a certain way. And that's why it is important to know this prevalent connection about it. 2. Science. Definitely, culture has to do with science, because science, from this context that we are speaking about, is the technological revolution or the evolution where all the facets have developed from a particular place remains to be seen. Because when we speak of culture, we say for example, the world over, the countries are divided into few parts. We call it the developed nations, developing nations, and the underdeveloped nations, isn't it? So tell me now, students, can this evaluation criteria that I mentioned, developed, developing, underdeveloped, is science a factored in element for this bifurcation? Yes, isn't it? So when we say developed nation, it is observed that science has taken a greater role in the development of that particular country, or developing country, or underdeveloped country for that matter, isn't it? And based on these criteria, whether the company is developed, developing, or underdeveloped, the nation I mean to say, if the nation is developed, developing, or underdeveloped, companies might think of launching the product. For example, if it is some country where it is underdeveloped, would underdeveloped with very thinly scarce, whereas scarce in terms of the resources. For example, if in an underdeveloped country where even food, water, sanitation are big time challenges, tell me, would a Coca-Cola or Pepsi think of marketing there as to launch a new business? Might be not, isn't it? So this awareness about the culture is important to launch in, to withdraw, to continue, what kind of resources to pump in, makes a huge decision making. Customs. So what kind of customs are there? Now, culture is also related to customs. When I say customs, it's about the festivals that people have. Custom in terms of tradition that the people have. It could be about the New Year Eve. It could be about certain symbolic dates that people celebrate. It could be of, for example, a custom that in India, especially in Central India or North India, where it is traditionally seen as Bhau Beej or Bhaiya Dooj, is a custom, isn't it? Now, if you're a chocolate manufacturing company, for example, Cadbury's, don't they market Bhaiya Dooj in a very different way in terms of the advertisement, in which the way they pitch in their product, highlighting the significance of a brother and sister relationship, isn't it? So, customs. Or it could be tools. What kind of tools people use in their culture? It also includes skills. What kind of skills people have as a nation? Now, are they more physically inclined by their job nature? Are they more intellectually use their minds, maybe cognitive side? So whatever aspect, or people use good languaging skills. Now, also students understand that all the factors that we are speaking of, they are all interdependent as well, within culture as well. So when we say culture, it is not a single point ingredient, or it's not a single entity. It is a combination of various things and which have influence over each other as well. And that's a very important point to understand. So when we say skills, when we say for example skills, are they dependent on science? Yes. Are they dependent on arts? Yes. Are they dependent on ideas? Yes. So these all are interdependent as well. Knowledge. How equipped the people are in terms of knowledge means when we say of culture, certain countries, for example, because of their evolutionary history, are very good in numbers. Say, for example, means they are they understand numbers very well. Say, for example, if you travel, go to South India, generally it is considered that people of Chennai, Karnataka, or Andhra Pradesh for that matter, are very good with numbers because that's part of evolutionary history. And that's part of culture where people are groomed more on a cognitive scale, and then also where genetics also plays a part to it. So knowledge, and this was just an example, and understand these are generalizations. Now, and generalization which are data specific, not that we are just drawing conclusions out of the blue. There definitely are exceptions to it, but these are generalizations, and what data analysts do or what business analysts do is gather these generalizations and use in strategies and decision making. Teaching. Now, teaching, when we say, has a different aspect altogether in different cultures. Now, from an Indian perspective, the concept of teaching always exists in terms of a guru and a shishya, isn't it? And they were very soundly laid right from 6th century BC onwards. And also, if you go to the Roman history as well, from Aristotle as well. So, different aspects of teaching as well, and teaching methodology. For example, Aristotle's method of teaching was by asking questions. In India, it was about seeking knowledge. It's about going for a specific number of years to learn. So teaching methodology also are different based on the culture sensitivity. Oh, language. Let me tell you, friends, a language is a good medium, or if I am to put it, they provide a good platform on which culture is run through. In fact, the culture is passed from generation to generation with language being a common medium. And sometimes people draw inferences from the language itself. In fact, they get to know how the language works as well. So it's important to understand this dynamics about language as well. And we know the difference between each of this as we go through. So we will spend some time on the aspect of language, how language influences culture as well. And we will kind of interrelate each of this as well. Great. So when we speak of culture, let's move on to understand certain basic beliefs or ideas what our great philosophers have at a particular point of time. So according to John Donne, he mentions that no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of a continent, a part of the man. That means no man exists as silos, or no man exists as a separate entity. They are different, they are unique, and yet they are dependent on each other. They are kind of interrelated with each other. So very important to understand this dynamics about it. That's one. Two, Larsen and Smalley, a blueprint. He mentioned that it's a blueprint. Culture is a blueprint that guides the behavior of people in a community and is incubated in family life. So we say that culture is very much part of a society, and the incubation or the seed is laid in the family because a lot of values. So tell me, is values a part of culture? Yes. And different countries or different communities or different topographic locations have different value system, isn't it? Now these values are groomed up or developed or nurtured right from our childhood days, and people that they learn from childhood, those things get registered in our mind for a longer period of time. It becomes a part of our neurology and our physiology both. So they're incubated in a family. So what I mean to say, when we say that it's a blueprint, that means they say that from a business perspective or from a company perspective, it is said that you can copy a company's product, you can copy a company's strategies, you can copy the company's processes, but you cannot copy a company's culture. So when we are saying culture, we don't restrict our discussion to a country, because normally culture means we always have this idea or thought that it has to be with the country only. Now if you dip down to a smaller location, it comes and becomes an entity as within the organization. So every organization has a culture, and all the elements that we spoke about within the culture, that means ideas, the customs, knowledge, skill, beliefs, language, exist as a part of culture, and that is something that is not easily copied. Means a culture is developed over a period of time. And if competition, they say if you want to copy a product, it's like this, isn't it? With the evolution of science and technology, copying a technology or copying a product becomes very easy, it becomes very fast as well. But copying a culture of any organization, wow, it's going to take a hell lot of time. The reason being, it is not ingrained at a particular point of time or a particular day of time. So when mission, vision and values are set for any organization, do you know that every company has a mission, vision and values? So you check out any company's website. If you are working already, students, look into your own company's website, or you look into ISBM's website if you're not working, and check out that every organization has a mission, vision and values. Now mission, vision, values are also the cultural dimension. They kind of highlight, or they give the essence of what the organization is all about. The one aspect, they are a kind of a flagship thing highlighting what the culture exists. Let's take a common example. For example, Tatas. Tatas have a very different culture than what Reliance has. Now, we know that they, at certain point of time, they might be competing with each other in certain domains. But Tatas, if you see the kind of cultural image that they have highlighted upon these years, was about being ethical, was about being standard, was about giving a quality product. On the other hand, when we take a Reliance, now the culture that exists in Reliance, or that's what it has been showcased as, aggressive company, want to diversify, speed is the name of the game. Now these are the aspects, risk-taking ability. Now we need to understand, friends, that when we say culture of values, we need not bifurcate them as right and wrong, because we don't say that these values are correct or these are not. Now every organization picks up culture that is relevant from their context, which is important from their scenario, which held significance based on their priorities. So that's how culture is developed. And we need to understand, when we are speaking culture from a business environment perspective, every organization has an objective towards laying forth a culture, and that's so very important to understand this dimension. Okay, so when we speak of a culture, uh, Matsumoto says that culture is dynamic. That means even in Tata's, for example, the culture that existed 20 years back and what exists now is not the same. Might be few are same, which they carry forward as their lifeline or their DNA, but they are dynamic. They keep on evolving as well, and they should be evolving as well. And how is culture formed? System of rules. Now, if you want to drive home a particular idea or a belief or a value, what do? We make rules about it. For example, in a family, does a culture exist also in a family? Yes, isn't it? And how are cultures made in the family? Right from a childhood days, it is incorporated by the parents or the grandparents that okay, these are the rules. Now rules are laid so that the culture is installed within the organization. Now these rules are the are kind of law enforcements which drives home the message of what the culture exists. So basically when we speak of culture, it is the system of rules. It is established by groups and units. Now, it's when we speak from an organization perspective, it is not that a particular function does it. So when we speak of a mission, vision or values of the company, it is not only related to only the HR unit who designs the outlay, but these mission and values are shared across all SBUs or strategic business units or functional heads, and they are driven across as a value statement or as a value proposition, so that it is kind of spread across throughout the organizational structure. Survival. So when we say culture is also about survival, that means that why organization want to set a culture? Because they know whatever they are striving for, the culture helps it sustain. Because what happens is, if one generation of people move and the other generation takes over, or a new brand of people takes over, sometimes the company philosophy changes, isn't it? So what culture does, it helps you survive, or it keeps those ideas afloat, takes the things ahead, is so very important to understand. It is also a reflection, as we saw that, is its culture is a reflection of attitudes, values, beliefs, norms and behavior. So it's a kind of combination of all of these elements put together. So let me ask you a question. Does attitude is culture an attitude? Yes, for sure, it's an attitude as well, because culture signifies itself in kind of defining itself into a behavior norm. It's also a belief, and it's also a norm. Norm means rules. They're set across as rules. Then it is shared by a group. Now when I say culture, the starting point are the prime stakeholders of the organization who set forth the culture of the organization. Now that culture has to be based on the value system, on what kind of vision that the stakeholders want to pursue is what we look forward to. They are harbored differently by each specific unit. Now when we say culture, it is not a real crystal cut into specific units. The same, for example, when we speak of a mission or a vision of an organization, every function, now every organization is spread across through sales unit, their HR unit, their marketing wings, the production wings, their operations, so on and so forth. Now, when we speak about the mission of each of these functional units, the mission is adapted or is flexible based on what they want to drive home, is important, based on their functional priorities. And most importantly, we mentioned that we cannot discount language, because language is a specific element as far as the culture is concerned, and communication across generations. Now, when we speak of Tata's, Reliance, Birla's, culture exists and is transmitted to various parts of the organization through a simple mechanism of communication, and communication exists within the organization. Now, when I say within the organization, it's called as internal communication. Now, internal communication is through it could be through an email, it could be through mailers, it could be through reminders, to remind of the norms or the rules. And the external communication. Now, when I say external communication of the organization, it means that a spokesperson is there who kind of puts across the thoughts and ideas what the company has to the outside world as well. Now, the point that we need to understand is that these things does impact the huge array of things that when going through. So, when we say culture, it is dynamic, it is system of rules established by groups and units, survival, attitudes, beliefs, values, norms and behaviors. It is shared by a group. It is harbored differently by each specific unit, and communication across generations. Okay, let's move ahead. And also potential to change across time. So when we speak of culture, we always say and believe that there's always an element of flexibility that is installed. Why flexibility? Because when we speak of culture, things that were relevant and useful a point back, maybe 20-30 years, that aspect of culture might be relevant. But with changing times, with changing priorities, with changing market dynamics, with changing business environment, you need to be flexible enough to modulate it, to change it as well. So, when we speak of culture, what Atkinson has to mention is that it is learners socially construct identities within learning, communities and native cultural milieu. That means that culture is also perceived, isn't it? Now, not everything that is seen, heard has to be real, but the point is people perceive it in a particular way. Now, even when people are working within the organization, or people who are looking at the organization from outside as external stakeholders, they have a perceived image about it, and that also is part of culture to understand. Great. So following, let's also now find out the characteristics of culture. So first, what we have tried, we have understood that it is a socio-cultural unit. We have understood the elements of culture, saying that the elements include are its ideas, its beliefs, its values, its knowledge, science, tools, skills, language. We have also tried to see how they are interrelated, and now we will see what are the certain characteristics of culture. And the characteristics of culture are, number one, learned. Means what? That culture is not inherited or biologically based. It is acquired by learning and experience. Need to understand that it's a learned behavior. It's not like a honeybee. You know the story of honeybee, isn't it? Now in honeybees they say, as you're born, you know what you need to do. Either you are a worker, a queen, or a drone, isn't it? The classical segmentation of honeybee. But that is genetic, that is biological, isn't it? But as the honeybee is born from the eggs, it's a neurological wiring or a chemical program. It's run that he or she gets to know whether it's a drone, it's a worker, or it's a queen. But when we speak of culture, it is not genetic and biological. It is something that is learned. Important to understand. Second, it is shared. Means what? People are members of the groups, organizations, or society, share culture. It is not specific individually. When we speak of culture, we never restrict our discussion to a particular individual. Even when we say that at the smallest unit of culture is a family, isn't it? We never say the culture of a person. Yes or no? So culture of a family is the smallest unit. So there need to be a group of people. It's the shared one. So when we speak from an organizational context, the shared value or shared belief, shared custom, shared skill, shared knowledge or shared language of the company. Then it is transgenerational. So very important to understand. It means that culture is passed on from one generation to the next. That means that the culture doesn't restrict itself to a particular time or a particular generation of people working in. It is kind of it kind of moves from one generation to the other. It is symbolic. Now, important facet, symbolic, means culture is based on human capacity to to use one thing that represents another. Now, students, let me tell you, we as human beings are more symbol oriented, and we love to resemble one thing with the other. One thing with the other. For example, let's take a simple example. If suppose a flag comes up in the market, say generally, we get to know, oh, is it 15th August or 26th Jan? Yes or no? So flags are symbolic of the nation or nation's independence, isn't it? Let's take some other examples. If colors are seen across, we know it's festival time. Or if it's crackers are seen, we know it's another festival time. So, be it individual or culture, they are more symbolic in nature. And since we talk about symbols, that's where from an organizational perspective, things that come up are logos or the flagship brands or branding or the company's design, the visiting card. They're all symbolic. And these are the symbols people love to be associated with. They feel great pride to be associated with. They think and feel they are part of a larger unit, and that's part of culture. So they're symbolic. Then it is adaptative, means that culture is based on the human capacity to change or adapt as opposed to the more genetically driven adaptive process of animals. So they are adaptive. So characteristics of culture are: number one, it is a learned behavior. Two, it is shared through people. Fourth, it is transgenerational. Fourth, it is symbolic. That means symbols exist. Fifth, it is adaptive. Important to understand these dimensions of culture. Okay. Now we look into factors that affect social and cultural environment. So we have defined culture, we have seen ingredients, we have seen characteristics. Now we will see what are the factors that influences culture. So what are those factors? One, attitude of people. Now, attitude in general, isn't it a part of culture? Yes, for sure. Ideas when we say, beliefs when we say, shared values need to have attitude. So with changing attitude, will the culture change? Yes, for sure. Attitude of wealth means when we speak of wealth, what kind of meaning you have given to wealth also defines the culture. Say for example, it is said that the meaning that you give is the instinct that you live. That means what meaning are you giving to anything? Now the meaning could be for wealth, it could be for career, it could be for growth, it could be for promotion, it could be for any of those things. Whatever meaning that we give are the behavior you are going to demonstrate. So attitude of wealth, marriage. Now is it going to affect culture? For sure. Then religion, big time, because every religion has its own set of customs, norms, which are going to influence culture as well. Then education. Is it important for culture? Yes. Ethics. Ethics are the values that as a company exists, or maybe as a community exists, or as a nation exists, does affect culture as well. Social responsibility. So the definition of social responsibility here means how much do you think you are interdependent, or you feel there is a responsibility towards society as well. So when we speak about civic sense, or when we speak about being more eco-friendly or more socially responsible as well, this is where we need to understand that all these factors influence culture. Important to understand this. So attitude of people, attitude of wealth, marriage, religion, education, ethics, social responsibility, and also as again all these are interdependent on each other. Yes or no? Like a marriage will influence, a religion will influence marriage. Marriage will influence attitude of wealth. Ethics will define marriage as well, isn't it? So they are all interdependent and they all are dynamic in nature. They are in a constant flux. They are constantly changing, evolving with times. So these all influence the culture. These are the factors that influence culture. Okay, culture that people create. Now, where are the nodal points or the points that people create a culture? Culture determines personality. Now, understand that certain type of people or certain personalities of people are formed in a certain culture. For example, does defense forces of any country sets a culture? Yes. A culture of sacrifice, a culture of dedication, a culture of discipline, a culture of commitment, a culture of living up to your highest values. Now, is that a culture as well? Yes. So they are, and is that something that could be inculcated? It's a learned trait. It is transmitted through groups. Yes or no? Yes. So culture determines personality. And when we say culture, it is not a single entity. There are again subcultures associated to it, because culture is under a constant flux. They are dynamic in nature, so they're kind of interdependent as well. So when we speak of subcultures, people have their own idiosyncrasies. Now what does idiosyncrasies mean? Means uncertainty. or not certain. Now people, they say, are not predictable always, isn't it? So they have their own kind of idiosyncrasies. There is a blend of hereditary cultural experience as well, subculture experience, family experience, and unique personal experience as well. So when we speak of Tatas and Birlas, they are all separate and distinct in their own ways. So when we speak of organizational culture, and if you want to inculcate that or want to form or define it, it creates distinction. Now, we need to understand first, students, is that why are we learning culture? First, it's going to influence, isn't it? Now, why do you want to create a certain kind of culture? Any answer? And the answer is that we want to create a certain kind of culture for the simple reason because they want to be separate and distinct. So when we speak of Tata's, for example, ethical company, that's the first few things. Apple, creative company. Walmart, big size company. In fact, the biggest in terms of revenue collection it does. So what happens is it creates an identity for itself. It means that it creates distinction. So what culture does from an organizational perspective, it creates distinction. It creates separateness. Now tell me, in today's competitive marketplace, being separate, unique, is it different? Is it important? I bet you should, isn't it? Separateness or uniqueness is something that everybody is striving for. To be separate, to be unique, to be special, isn't it? To be different. There is a sense of identity as well. When we say of sense of identity, people resemble. Identity is personality. People want to associate with that kind of identity. For example, when some people want to join Google, so they have perceptions about Google, isn't it? Now perceptions could be about innovativeness, it could be about big pay packages, it could be about the culture of friendliness, it could be about openness. So any of those. So it creates a sense of identity. Commitment. Culture also draws forward a sense of commitment. Important to understand. And enhance social system stability. Now what also culture does is, since it is passed from one generation to the other, what it does, it gives a sense of stability. From that platform, we could easily kind of transmit messages, because since culture is an already established channel, any communication in line with the culture gets easily transmitted, isn't it? So for example, if some company is driving home the message of commitment, say for example, they will be kind of sharp when they want to drive home other relevant and related messages of commitment. For example, if people want to drive home the message of trustworthiness, now does it go well with commitment? It does. So these could be add-on features. So what the slide is going to tell you is telling the implications of culture. What does the culture do to the organization? It creates its own identity. It creates separateness as being unique and special. It creates a sense of commitment, because since people want to be part of that culture, a sense of commitment comes in as well. And also it gives you a kind of structure which everybody is gelled into, and that itself is a great value add, and also checks on attrition as well, and that's the important point to be understood. Great. Now we'll look into how country to country as well, things change. And if you're working for an organization, or if you want to work for an organization, these all things matter. Let's take an example. So when we say, when we are here trying to connect culture and globalization. Now check this. Now when businesses goes international, work motivation, profit motivation, business goal, gift giving, customs, greetings, body gestures, colors, and members all vary, they differ. And we'll take an example, a wonderful example, and we will take two examples of two different countries, and also one equate with India as well. So we have two countries we have taken up, the US and Japan, and we have also taken few parameters and we'll compare each of these parameters. Now the parameters are defined by culture, correct? Okay, so US, the company, team in sports, family in village. So general orientation, if you see the company, they are more sporty in orientation. In Japan, when we speak about company profile, they look at more as a family. So they look into more as a unit, a more closely bondness. Now tell me, if this is the idea or the belief that the people have, do their behaviors change? Yes. Now when you say team in sport, would they be more competitive? Yes. Would there be fair pay as well based on performance? Yes. Here in Japan, when we speak of family in a village, for example, would they forgive people and give more chances to people? Yes. Would they nurture people for higher positions? Yes. Would they groom people? Yes. So if you see, this set itself, and this is part of culture of the countries, we will find different behaviors being demonstrated. 2. Business goal. When you see sport, being competitive, business goal, to win. Here, to survive. Employees refers to players in team. Here it refers to children in family. Different, so very different, yes. Human relationship, they are more functional. That means they are more business oriented. They are kind of related, only work on work. If you see over here, it is more emotional. The sense of bonding is there. Okay, competition, cutthroat, because it is competitive by nature. Whereas in Japan, it is cooperative. It's about bonding and sharing, isn't it? Let's take as work motivation. So what is the work motivation from a US perspective? Their individual income. Since it's about being competitive, it's about more generating income. Here it is about group income. How much the family earns together matters. Promotion, it is to ability. That means based on the performance. Here the length of the service, the tenure of service that you work in, you get elevated, because the concept is about living under one roof or the sufficient length of time. Pay, service and results. Whereas from a perspective of Japan, you will find award of patience and sacrifice. People who put forth long years of service, tenure, because that's also a reflection of commitment as well, is shown as well. So very different aspect. Now understand students that these are generalizations. Need not necessarily that all companies have to demonstrate this, but this is what culture that exists, and we never define this into right and wrong. We never say this is right or that is wrong, or the vice versa. The point is, when we are learning business environment from an MBA perspective and future CEOs, We need to understand these dynamics that exist as a part of culture. Okay, let's take the other example. Now, in the earlier slide, we saw about two countries, isn't it? Now we look into one, Japan, India, the social culture factor, how it defines. So culture determines goods and services as well. So let's check on. So one, we have seen Japan, and we'll compare that with India. So one, the government administration. In Japan, the emphasis in government by the virtues and abrogation of coercion, mutual trust, minimum control, and highly motivated. That means the controls are less. It is expected that you are highly motivated. This we are speaking of Japan. When you speak of India, here it is prevalence of impersonal bureaucratic social relationship, mistrust, assumption of human evil, highly concentrated administration, bureaucratic delays, low level of delegation. So here a lot of power structure exists as far as Indian conditions are concerned, and lot of hierarchies exist because of control mechanisms which exist because of the underlying belief that human evils exist, that people can't be trusted, is also a part of culture. Attitude towards work and goal. Now when you see from a Japan perspective, highly result oriented. Here it is generally deep seated when you speak attitude. Discipline, when you see from a Japan perspective, the highly disciplined and respect towards superiors. Here the discipline generally has to be maintained by rules, and that's the reason you'll find a lot of rules being adopted within Indian companies, just to be so that people adhere to the norms. Group harmony. When we speak of group harmony, here it is highly based on informal facilitative patterns of behavior, and here assumption of an equality, suspicious environment, and self-centeredness. Education highly emphasized. Here it is slightly general and varies a lot. Now these differences are quite a few if you see in terms of relativeness. People's attitude towards business, if you see in countries like UK, Saudi, South Korea, are very different from what exists in other countries. If you see attitude towards work, when it comes to moral, motivation, penalty and reward system, are very different in these countries as well. Collectivism and individualism, if you see, are two factors which also is a part of a culture. So when we say of collectivism, you find more in Asian countries. When you see in individualism, you find more in Western countries. And that you can see as an example as well. All individual sports, when you see in Olympics, are seen with the Western world. But when you see group sports, they are very well synergized with the Asian countries or Eastern countries, to call it so. So when we say the ambition or complacent to get a job, so education, family, authority, religion, marriage, and the resource, they all are influencing culture to a great extent. Okay, stereotypes or generalizations. Now, understand, we will always ask this question: what are stereotypes? What are generalizations? Now, understand, culture is in a way generalization. What does generalization mean? We can say that this thought is prevalent to majority of the community, or maybe the company, or maybe the nation. Stereotypes, it could be individual or specific in nature. So culture, is it a stereotype or generalization? It is generalization. Okay, so what is a stereotype and generalization? Examples, for example, let's take an example to understand this. How do women drive? Tell me, stereotype or generalization? So a lot of time when we speak from an Indian perspective, we know that women are poor drivers. Generalization. But yeah, we know that some women really drive very well. Okay. An oversimplified manner of viewing a culture using exaggerating categories, or stereotypes form due to our own perceptions view to others. Now understand, we need to segregate or draw a line to make a difference between, are we perceiving it that to be a culture or a culture exists? Important point to be noted. That means sometimes people believe or have the frame or perceive it that it is that way. It need not necessarily has to be that way. So is it a stereotype or perception, or is it actually a form of culture? Is something that needs to be dealt into. Culture differences must be learnt and accepted when learning. So when we are learning, we need to understand these differences and go through it and turn individual perception into appreciation. So we know that when we are speaking of a cultural perspective, there are certain individual norms as well, which we know are part of the learning curve. Great. Extend activity. So what we'll do is, students, is within this session, we'll kind of put up few case studies which you can think on, work on, write notes on. Call this a homework or call this a workshop that you need to work on. Now understand, students, when we are dealing in online MBA lecture, we understand that yes, the discussion tool in terms of asking a question might not happen, but in this online medium as well, we will be giving you certain case studies that you need to work on, and one of these, we will take few of this in this session itself. One, extend activity. Brainstorm stereotypes in different countries and culture. So what you could do over here is make a one-page draft or one-page write-up demonstrating or showcasing that what kind of stereotypes are defined once again, our perception, our individual perception in different countries and cultures. Let me give an example. For example, some Western countries still believe that India is a country where the snake charmers country. That means some people have a perception who might not have visited India, a Western country, still feel that it is a country where the snake charmers are there. Now, that is a stereotype or a generalization? It's a stereotype, it's a perception. So that is one example. So please write up maybe a half page to one page, maybe of a particular country, about stereotype and in different countries and communities. So that's exercise number 1. Great. Let's speak about attitudes. So when we speak of attitudes, it's coming from a stereotype. We know that when we are speaking of stereotypes, stereotypes are perception, and perception itself is coming from attitude. What Gardner and Lambert mentioned, that motivation as a construct made up of certain attitudes. Now motivation itself is not a single thought, it's coming from a multiple level of thoughts, isn't it? So that's again an individual construct. It's a stereotype based on insufficient knowledge, misinformed stereotyping, and extreme ethnocentric thinking. So when we say that people are racial, it also means that certain people have individual thoughts or attitudes, maybe for or against a certain community or a country. So that could be dangerous as well. So that's also based on insufficient knowledge. For example, the example that I spoke about, India is a snake charmer's country. Is it misinformation? Yes, it's a misinformation. Example, better proficiency by students who did not want to stay in the USA. So we cannot correlate certain facets to things based on inappropriate knowledge. Positive attitudes can help learning as well. Now, what is positive? Now, a lot of times these days people speak about positive attitude, negative attitude. What does positive attitude mean? Positive attitude means you are open. Open for what? Open for new thinking to come in. Open to doubt your existing beliefs. Open to feel and accept that you can be wrong in your assumptions. Open to think there are other ways things could be done. Open to accept that people are different and all people need not be as what you are, or you need not be what people are. They're different, they're special and unique in their own ways. So this is about openness. The role of a teacher is to change the negative attitude. So when we are speaking of cultural dimension of an organization, it is important that we correct it at the right stage. So the intervention that happens in a training or soft skill training, or intervention of an OD intervention or organizational development intervention, or an intervention like a coaching or mentoring, these things are taken up as corrective measures. Great. Second, cultural acquisition. Now, second cultural acquisition, here, for example, learning a second language involves learning a second culture. Now, we understood, we have kind of mentioned earlier that language is the platform through which culture runs. Now, if this is true, we know that learning is a second language means a new culture can come through a second language itself. So, what Robinson says that culture learning is a magic carpet ride into another culture. So, when we are learning a language, we are getting into and trying to understand a new culture. For example, if you are born in India and if you're reading some Shakespeare novel or a drama, you actually are living in a different world altogether, a different way of thinking altogether, the different way you react and respond as well, the different. A foreign language could present culture as a list of facts to be cognitively consumed by the student. No interaction with the culture whatsoever. It is a process of perceiving, interpreting, feeling and being in the world. It's a process of acculturation or a reorientation of thinking and feeling. Now understand, students, that in India, for example, English is not the first language for many people, isn't it? It just came through us, through Britishers, and it came with a culture as well. In India, it is generally second, third language are very common, isn't it? That is not that exist in other countries. In other countries, there is actually only one language or maybe two languages. In India, 2 or 3 is the minimum that people know as language. So through language as well, we Indians are more exposed to different kind of cultural beliefs, values as well. And they itself becomes very dynamic in nature, more holistic in nature as well. So when we think of culture shock, so what is a culture shock? So the first stage when we say of cultural shock, any cultural shock that exists for humans, is the excitement and euphoria of a new culture. So when a new employee walks into an organization has a different culture. He might go into a cultural shock because of certain disciplines that you find out there, which he himself has never lived up to. Second stage, intrusion of a more and more cultural differences. So when an employee joins in, the second stage of finding the differences. Third, acceptance of differences. Second stage, as an employee stays there for some period of time, he starts accepting the differences of a culture. And then the fourth stage, which all people go through as employees, is assimilation adaptation. He adapts himself to the existing culture of the organization. For example, if suppose in an organization, punctuality is something that the company thrives on or the company lives by. For example, all process-oriented companies, just-in-time kind of schedule. So they have a fixed time to log in or check in their workplace or workstations. Now, if some person is walking inside this cultural environment who himself is not very punctual as far as earlier life was concerned, maybe as a student, maybe as his previous employer, but when he comes away, he finds it very different. He feels that why there is a need to become punctual. So far as I am doing my job, come on, you should consider my time guidelines. Now that could be one way of looking at it. Now, but as he stays there, he seeks to find this difference, and slowly he wants to accept this as well, because he knows that it's not about one-to-one, it's about one-to-many. That means it's part of the entire cultural norm which he has to adhere to as well. And then he accepts and adapts to it as well. That's how the flow happens. Okay. Excellent activity. So one activity, the second activity for you. Students, please do this. It will help you a lot. Because let me tell you, time and again, doing an MBA, it's not about getting degrees. I repeat, doing an MBA is not only about getting degrees. It's about understanding knowledge to the core. It's about being open. It's about trying out. It's about taking initiative. Important. And that's where ISBM has always stood out for. It's just not about delivering a lecture. It's about adding real value to students' life. Helping them look into from a different perspective. Helping them with adding rich values. Because that's part of the culture of ISBM itself. Okay, so second activity is sharing with the class the process of second culture acquisition. So what we can do is write up and figure out what kind of culture. Please, if you're already working, please figure out what kind of culture exists within your own organization. So pick up maybe 4-5 points that define what the culture is. Number one. Number two, if suppose you are not working for an organization, pick up where your parents are working, your father or mother, wherever they are working. Please do a research, find out from them what kind of culture exists in his or her company. Do a research. Now let me tell you, if you are not employed, this will help you a lot. One, to crack interviews, to understand businesses, to understand companies. It will help you a lot. The other aspect of culture, social distance. Now what is the social distance? It refers to the cognitive and affective proximity of two cultures that come into contact within an individual. Now we know that we are living in an environment or a place where companies have gone global. They become transnational. They are operating in different countries. Now, when we say of social distance, is the distance that exists within communities. And so very important to understand that different cultures or different communities or different countries have different social distances, and social distance here includes the physical distance as well. So if you see in countries like India or Asian countries, people are more closely knit. That means the physical distance or bonding within them is much more thinner. That means they are very closely knit as compared to Western countries where the social distance are different. So when you speak this, these are two people interacting. Now you see these two people are interacting and see the physical distances. Now we never say that having closer physical distance means they are closely bond. That depends on the culture. And so very important to understand this dynamics. So according to John Schussman, it is about dominance, it's about integration, it's about cohesiveness, it's about congruence, and it's about permanence. So it's about how do we interrelate to all of this to each other. So how to measure social distance becomes a good question to ask at this point of time. So sometimes a good measure to ask through is lack of objectivity. Sometimes you are not objective about it, or perceived social distance through professed difference in attitude questionnaire. So a psychometric tool. So one, it could be based on there is no clear guidelines about it, or through a questionnaire, or optimal distance model. That means we actually check out the physical distance. If you walk in certain companies, for example, if there's a coffee break or tea break, people really come in close together. They're kind of well-knit families. Or sometimes when people are there, they come together, but their physical distance are very apart, even in a non-formal environment. Or second, cultural acquisition in adults and children are different because children learn at a different stage altogether as what adults learn. The teaching in cultural competence. Now, the way we learn, now since organizations always are on a learning curve, this will also differ. So when we say this, that the need of being sensitive to the fragility of students when promoting cultural understanding and self-awareness. So when an induction program is run through by the company, and if the company is employing cross-cultural people, very important to understand the cultural differences. So when people do get employed in Google, say for example, when people come from China, Indonesia, US, Indians, Sri Lanka, Burma, Afghanistan, Iraq, now different cultures, isn't it? And Google itself has a different culture. So how do we integrate that and yet we are sensitive to each culture of it? So very important to understand. Also, the socio-cultural importance, the best model is to learn the language where culture is directly experienced. Okay, the teaching implication when we are looking from a learning perspective are: number one, if you are actually learning or teaching experience, have you encountered situations where cultural classroom expectations have been misunderstood? Now, when you are dealing with people of multicultural origins, so many times it has happened that a certain word has different meaning, and people understand the meanings based on their upcoming or grooming, and those words can signify different things to different people. See, for example, success, to become successful. Let's take a simple example. To become successful for an Indian might be very different to what to become successful for a US citizen might be. Because the words don't relate the actual interpretation. To become successful is culturally sensitive, is culturally dependent, is culturally conditioned, is culturally influenced, is an important point to understand. Okay, cultural categories to study cultural norms are individualism. Now, what is individualism? If you say individualism, if you want to simply define individualism, is how do people exist as an individual entity? Means a loosely integrated society opposed to collectivists which are tightly integrated. In individual society, they are separate, they are different from each other as well. Power distance. Now, power distance are also separate as well. If you see inequality between societies in a culture as well. For example, in certain countries, the more higher you get elevated as designation, it is assumed or believed that you should keep distance from the people of lower hierarchy. For example, a CEO of an organization need not or has to talk less to maybe a operator. Power distance, and that's a belief, it's a part of culture. So individualism, power distance, it could be uncertainty avoidance. Now, what does uncertainty avoidance mean? It is perceiving situations as unstructured, unclear, unpredictable, preference to avoid those situations. So a lot of times it is assumed that certain problems or certain situations need to be avoided. Now, this could be a situation that exists, uncertainty avoidance, or it could be masculinity. Now, this is something that exists globally as well. It means that biological and social roles of sexes in a culture. For example, a lot of cultures still exist where pays are determined by the gender that they belong to. And here the pays that we are referring to is not about only the physical work. Because physical work, we can understand that since men are more masculine, can do more work, although that itself is a generalization. But even the mind works, even the works in the organization, it has been proven by a lot of statistics across the globe that women are less paid than men, even in a similar hierarchy. Need to understand the dynamics. So it could be all these are influenced by culture. Homework number 3, and that is that create a short sketch where the cultural categories to cultural norms are evident. So figure out a company where you find that there are certain culture that exists, and to back up that culture, there are norms that exist or rules that exist to influence it. Okay, so we will also now look into language, policy and politics. Now, they are closely interlinked. Now, it is all the more relevant in India's context because we are a multilingual country, as so many languages. Officially registered itself becomes 35, and they say there are close to 350 languages within the country itself. Now, all these languages, since we know that language itself has cultural implications. So when we say teaching English, say for example, as a way of homogeneity. So when Britishers started off this philosophy of teaching from an English medium perspective, that itself has created an environment of homogeneity. The word Englishes, for example, navigation of the language from the inner circle countries to outer ones. So if you see, English as a language has kind of outgrown in the last 50 years or so. Earlier restricted only to metro towns, but now has dissipated to even rural and tier 1, tier 2 and tier 3 cities as well. English is the native language. Now there are countries where it exists as ENL, or English as a native language, or as a second language, or as a foreign language, has been attacked by more than sociolinguistic reasons. So for example, in India, right from the beginning, importance to learning English has been on high fold. If you see countries like China, they have still restricted to Chinese their first language, although English is taken up as a second language. English must be seen in terms of a broader range of its functions and its penetration into society as well, because it has started becoming the language of the business as well. Discussions between native English speaking teachers and non-native, so a lot of discrimination also happens because of knowing English or not knowing English. Students, one of the biggest mental block is people try to relate intelligence with English, and that's, it's a big time stereotyping. It's a misconstrued notion. Knowing English doesn't mean you're intelligent or you know more. It's just a language. Evaluating English proficiency with the skills required. Extended activity, and activity will be discuss political issues on language policies in India. The National Bilingual Program in India, Bilingual Project in India, and the Bilingual Project in your own company. So check out, if you're working, find out what all languages are used in your own organization. If you're working, if you're not, pick up your parents' companies, or if your parents are self-employed or they are running business, check up for some relatives who are working and check out what kind of languages are being spoken in their company. The ESL and the EFL, English as a foreign language or English as a second language. So few things. Now English within a culture where it is spoken natively is ESL, and EFL is English within a culture which is not spoken natively. The context in which English is taught determines the way to teach it. Now, when you speak it from an Indian perspective, a lot of importance has been laid right from the beginning about the importance of English as the language, not only to career but for doing business as well. The linguistic imperialism and language rights. A lot of time it has so happened that language has been tried to dominate as well. That means when earlier it was said, it was believed that countries were colonized by their physical method. That means people used to go there and kind of capture the entire market. But when we are speaking from a linguistic imperialism, that means the language has gone there and remained there, is what the linguistic imperialism, what we have to say about. So if it is the propagation of English as a language in the world, an implication on people's linguistic and cultural aspects. It is reconstructing cultural inequalities between English and other languages as well. It's also about the genocide of colonial language due to the spread of English, and laws to promote native language development. So we have also important that when we speak of culture, the native language is important as well. So we don't forget on the regional languages which are important to keep the culture alive as well. High respect for students' culture and native languages which diversify human beings as well. The implications when we see from a language perspective, One of the implications, should schools, institutes and universities refrain from teaching English so that the heritage language and cultures can be preserved? There's something of a point to be debated. Put forth your views as well. In what ways has your language or learning or teaching experience valued home languages and culture? So when you were growing up through your school, what are the implications that had on you with English as a language, if it was there or not there, in either of that? The language policy and the English only kind of debates exist. When we say language policies, meaning that socio-political domain of second language acquisition, it was always there. The language of education means an entity decides to offer it in a designated language. So one body decided it has to be there, English the language, or discussions about the language of education, linguistic and cultural imperialism and diversity. So always a debate has remained whether English should be there as a first language, second language, or not there at all. It is always subject to debate. But yeah, when we are looking for a business environment, we need to also understand that by and large across the world, English has to remain a business language and has to be seen in that context. The minority cultures and their sufferings due to the English only policy as well. So we also need to understand that even though English is a business language, we can never overlook the regional languages, which are also important to remain the culture alive as well. Language, thoughts and culture. Tell me, does language influence thoughts? It does. Does it influence culture? So it does. So they say that the words shape our lives, and the case of advertisements, for example, fat kids at McDonald's, and how McDonald's have been influencing societies across countries as well. What a language can hide of reality. So words really go on to define the world as well, where a language frames the way people think. Political rhetoric, an example. Let me give an example. There's an African tribe wherein in their language they don't have a word for lie, L-I-E, opposite of truth. I repeat, there's an African tribe in their culture or in the language, they don't have a word to tell lies. And the interesting part is, they don't know what is a lie. That means they don't lie. So that means words has such a great influence on behaviors and so the culture. That means language has a very great impact on the culture itself as well. So when we speak of example, the structure for questions can affect its answer. If I ask you, isn't the day great? One way to ask the question. The second question could be, today's day is not good, na? So the question itself is instigating things or conditioning things in certain way. So the kind of questions you ask also kind of shapes things. The words define the culture as well. Great. So when we see the image of George Bush in his time, certain things that are relevant. The discourses levels of language, sometimes used for persuasion, influential in our cognitive and affective states. The words that we use, people does influence. Conversational discourse styles may be a factor of culture as well. Also, lexical related to language study, issued by a person, shows the intersection of its culture and its cognition. For example, it's a wonderful example. If you see in this picture, a machine gun with the oil on, we get to the point, isn't it? Or why we must go to the war to the Iraq? We must toil against Saddam's aggression. So a lot of things that are depicted within the language that goes on to signify the intention behind it as well. The Beforian hypothesis, it says that does language reflects the culture? It does. Versus, does language shape the culture? So how does it impact in each of this? So when we say linguistic relativity in the interaction of language and culture, so when we speak of connectedness, they all things impact each other as well. The use of meta languages. So when we say meta languages, other languages used or certain words that are used that are reflective about it. An activity for you, and that is create an advertisement that persuades the client to buy it. So when you are making or creating an advertisement, you would be careful about which language to use, yes or no, based on the audience. Two, you would be careful about what words are you using, persuasive, influensive, yes or no. What kind of symbols are you using? What ideas and beliefs are you propagating based on the demographic locations, the type of people involved? The implications are, to what extent have the foreign language learning experience involved internalizing culture, thought patterns along with the language from themselves? Suppose if a student has born and brought up in a vernacular medium, any language, and is enrolled in a company where only English runs in as a common medium. Now, as a person walks in, he might get a cultural shock because he's not really well versed or well versed with the language. The first impact might be his confidence might be hit based on the personality. That maybe I don't know the language itself, and he might need to learn the culture, the language, and through that language also comes the culture. Now, a lot of times English as a language comes to different cultures as well, and people need to be sensitive about it. From a classroom perspective, when we say classroom from a workplace perspective, cultural activities in a workplace must include customs and belief system, should be aware about it. The analysis of stereotypes, the degrees of willingness to participate openly, analysis of linguistic imperialism, the treatment of employees' uncertainty avoidance, rules of males and females sensitive to genders, should be careful about it. Connections between language features and cultural ways of thinking, feeling and acting, because we know that different words mean different things, so we need to be sensitive about it. And previous experience of students' native cultures as well. So when we want to draw inferences or conclusions from socio-cultural aspect, we see that culture is a big influence, where learning a second and a foreign language in terms of communicating, socializing and stereotyping are involved. The creation of a new cultural identity when acquiring a language is concerned. Culture shocks to overcome to the learning process itself, and teachers or employers need to be sensitive to stereotypes culture as well. And the role of English as a language also is important to understand. This was the first half of the session. The second half, we will look into the environmental factors that influence business environment. So when we speak of a business environment, that it involves task environment, competitive forces in the task environment as well, and the technological factors. These are all factors we will look into as we move along. Great. So when we look into the organization, there are competitive forces factored in by technological forces, then political and legal forces, then there are cultural forces as well. And if you see the outer layer, they include the general environment, political systems, economic systems, the demographics, and the ecosystem as well. So when we are looking from a general environment, we look into each of these parameters one by one. When we look into general environment, few things, sometimes called the macro environment. These are extended factors such as inflation and demography that usually affects indirect to most of the organizations. We look into the factors in general environment that influences the types of economic system, what kind of economic system it has, and the economic conditions, the type of political system it has, the political conditions it has, the conditions in the ecosystem, that means what kind of conditions go on to define the economic ecosystems as well, or the demographics, that means what kind of social patterns that exist with different people as well, or the cultural background of each of these organizations. The role of government rules here in India, the government acts as a watchdog over business. It provides direction in areas such as antitrust, monetary policies, the fiscal policies, the defense, and the human rights. Here the government itself lays down certain structural norms as well, and the environmental matters as well. When you are looking at the economic system, it includes, India has an economic system in which there are privately controlled markets, there are markets which are privately handled, they are based on supply and demand, what kind of supply and demand exists. There are free market competition as well. There are private contracts which are given as well. There are profit incentives that are given as well, and based on the technological advancement the country has made into. So based on that, the economic system is also laid in. Okay, the ecosystem. When we say of ecosystem, is the entire context that it exists in. So in an ecosystem, there is a renewed committee to the environment and environment. So you find this Go Green or eco-friendliness unit, which could be a part of CSR initiative or could be a different function within an HR unit which takes care of it. In 1981, if you see, 4% wanted environmental improvements, whereas things changed on with 80% wanted improvements when people want to be more eco-friendly about it. So when we say environmental conscious means what? It means that cuts back on environmentally unsafe operations, compensate for environmentally rich endeavors, avoids confrontation with state and federal pollution agencies. It complies early with government regulations. It promotes new manufacturing technologies which are more eco-friendly, and it recycles waste as well. So we look into the products that are going as waste as well, how it could be recycled in and brought in so that it becomes more environment friendly as well. So these factors are roped in as well. Okay, the demographics. So when we speak about the demographic conditions, the characteristic of a population such as age, race, gender, ethnic origin and social class varies and differs based on demographics. It determines the characteristics of work groups, organizations, specific markets that they work in, or nations or populations as well. And the demographics also influences marketing, advertising, and human resource decisions as well. They kind of make impact on each of these elements. And last but not the least, such the number of individuals of age to 18 to 25. Now why 18 to 25? The reason being, these are going to be the future youth. They are already in the employment zone. They have a lot of financial power with them as well. So these demographics are relevant from business environment perspective, and they change with time as well. Great. Now the factors that we look into, the cultural forces. When we are looking at the cultural force, that means that the culture is a shared characteristic of values and beliefs of a group that distinguishes them from another group. So we need to be careful about when we are dealing with different set of culture, they're kind of distinct and separate as well. And we need to understand this distinctions and separateness of each culture, such as religion, language, heritage. Okay, the Hofstede's framework gives important distinctions about it, and those are the power distance. It is the degree to which influence or control are unequally distributed among individuals. The salary differentiation, for example, between a CEO differs from that of its frontline employees. The uncertainty avoidance, where degree to which members of the society attempt to avoid ambiguity or unknownness, riskness of the future, or individualism. It is the extent to which society expects people to take care of themselves and their immediate results, and or degree to which individuals believe they are masters of their own destiny. So when we say of frameworks, the Hofstede's framework is on power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism. So the other factors also are collectivism, where it measures tendency of group members to focus on common welfare and feel loyalty towards one another. The masculinity, whereas degree to which acquisition of money and things is valued and high quality of life of others is not. The Confucian dynamism. Now what is this Confucian dynamism? It says the stability of a society is based on unequal relationships. The family is the prototype of all organizations, and people should treat others as they should be treated. So Confucian society looks into three aspects. One, the stability. The family is to be looked at as the smallest unit of the organization, or the people should be treated with fairness. So the basic types of task environments, if you see, the factors in the environment are few, quite similar to each other, and basically the same over time. Examples of soft drink distributors, they by and large remain the same. So it is a simple, two probabilities we are taking. One is the simple and the complex task, and the other is the stable and changing. So if you see, this is simple and stable. If you see the complex and the stable, where the factors of environment are numerous, not similar to each other, basically the same over time. Examples are basic food production firms as well. You take this where the business environment is changing and it's complex as well, where factors in environment are numerous, they are not similar to each other, and they are continually changing. Example are computer firms. And we take the other factor where it is changing and yet simple. For example, factors in environment are few, somewhat similar to each other, and continue changing. Examples are fast food outlets, simple but yet changing. The environmental uncertainty, when we speak, the ambiguity or uncertainty of certain factors external to an organization, and they are government regulation which the organization have a less control of. The competition, stability of inputs, the demand characteristic, example customer bargaining power, separate and distinct. Okay, the turbulent environment where it is constantly changing, it is complex which is changing constantly, both ambiguous and unpredictable. Important to understand, so sometimes very difficult to figure out how it's working. Now, when we speak about the business environment, the competitive force in the task environment, one is the rivalry among existing firms in the industry. It is also influenced by threats of substitutive goods. It's influenced by suppliers' bargaining power. It's influenced by threat of new competitors. It's also influenced by buyers' bargaining power as well. So look into each of these one by one. Okay, so one, competitors. Now, importance and effect of competitors. Competitors are important day-to-day environmental force facing organization because it's so very competitive. Rivalry among competitors lead to price cutting, advertising promotions, enhanced customer service or warranties, and improvements in product and service quality. They keep on changing. The new entrants. Now, we know when we speak of competition, new entrants keeps on happening. So, barriers to entry. What does existing players do as barriers? The economies of scale. For example, the decrease in per unit cost as volume of goods and service produced increases. Now, when companies are already existing in a kind of business, since we know with the learning curve increases, with the economies of scale goes up, we find the more you produce, the lesser cost you can put up across. Now, as you can do this, the new company or the new entrant, it becomes very difficult to give that per unit cost at the initial level, because the earlier companies have already gone through that learning curve faster, and with the bigger economies of scale, they can give it a lesser price. The product differentiation means the uniqueness in quality, price, design, brand image, or customer service. In that gives the product an edge over the competition as well. That's also a big time advantage. To understand, okay, new entrants, then what? Then capital requirement. Now, need to understand that, especially if you are in an industry where the initial amount of capital required, suppose, is immense. Now, for a new entrant, it becomes too difficult to manage that kind of capital. For example, if it's a manufacturing unit or a high production unit, for a new entrant to amaze or to gather that kind of huge capital investment is next to impossible, because he has to then get the resource funded, and to get the resource funded is one thing, but they have to repay it back as well. So if you see in any high machinery or high capital investment companies, the people coming in becomes difficult. For example, if you see energy section, energy as a power plants, difficult. It requires huge capital. So you find less few companies coming in. Or if you see, for example, cement companies, very few. If you see iron coast companies, very few. So mining companies, very few. So where the initial capital investment is huge. Government regulations is also the factor that comes in, where may bar or severely restrict potential new entrants to an industry. So that also kind of implies as well. Okay, substitutes of goods and service. That's another variant that people need to go by. Where goods and service, if you see, that can be easily replace the firm's goods and service. So if you have an existing goods and service, we know that people could easily substitute that goods and service very fast, and need to understand this dimension. And when we are saying replaceable, need not necessarily it has to be by the same goods. It could be by something else. So we always tell the story about pagers. So when pagers came into the market, it was a huge boom because the messages were instantly delivered. But you know, the technological revolution, mobiles just swept across pagers within very fast time. The pager's life was maybe less than a year, and it was a big technological boom. But as mobile phones came in, it got replaced altogether. So they can be easily replaced, the firm's goods and services. For example, Starbucks introduced a new drink called Frappuccino. It's a cold drink that can substitute a more traditional hot coffee drink. Now, every organization need to be aware about it, how they can introduce it, a new product or service, so that it becomes more effective. Customers. Now, when we speak of customers, there are potential effect of customers. So these days we speak a lot of customer centricity. So they may drive down prices because we are looking from a demand to supply chain as well, and that is decided by the customer itself. The customers may have a great impact in deciding that. That means potential effect on customers. That means they may drive down prices. They push for more or high quality products. So the demands might go up. Increase competition among sellers by paying one against each other. So if there are more competitors available and customer is suppose the king, the competitors might drop down their prices to gain more market share. That's one that directly affects. Integration. Now what does integration means? It is a purchasing or developing related business units thought of as facing a customer. Now, if suppose an organization has different functions, it is about how you are going to integrate all different functions into one head so it works efficiently. It is a forward integration when you are purchasing your customer. You need to understand why do you do that? Or it could be a backward integration where purchasing your supply, so it could be the stakeholder. It could be the horizontal integration where purchasing competitors as well. So integration could be any level. Integration could be going forward and purchasing your customer itself. That means you drop down your prices, or you go backward and purchase the suppliers as well, or you go laterally and purchase the competitor as well. So that means you are taking over the competition itself. If you see, the customers exhibit bargaining power to that extent that they purchase a large volume related to supplier's total sales. The product or service represents a significant expenditure by the customer. They propose a realistic threat of backward integration, for example, as well, or they have readily available alternatives for the same service or products. And one of the last segment that impact things are suppliers. When you speak of suppliers, they are the bargaining powers of suppliers, where they often controls how much they can is increased by the patents and the copyrights, is increased by suppliers and customer alliances. So suppliers also have the great impact on the business environment. Great. So that brings us to the end of the session. That means we have discussed two aspects. One, the the factor of social cultural factors that influence business environment, and second, environmental factors. So social cultural factors and environment factors. Any questions? Please go back, do your homework. If you have a doubt, drop a mail.